Verse 1, cry out loudly, don't hold back. Raise your voice like a ram's horn. Tell my people their transgression and the house of Jacob their sins. They seek me day after day and delight to know my ways, like a nation that does what is right and does not abandon the justice of their God. They ask me for righteous judgments. They delight in the nearness of God. Why have we fasted, but you have not seen? We have denied ourselves, but you haven't noticed. Look, you do as you please on the day of your fast and oppress all your workers. You fast with contention and strife to strike viciously with your fist. You cannot fast as you do today, hoping to make your voice heard on high. Will the fast I choose be like this? A day for a person to deny themselves, to bow their head like a reed, and to spread out sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast and a day acceptable to God? Isn't this the fast I chose? To break the chains of wickedness, to untie the ropes of the yoke, to set the oppressed free, and to tear off every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, to bring the poor and homeless into your house, to clothe the naked when you see him, and not to ignore your own flesh and blood? Then your light will appear like the dawn, and your recovery will come quickly. Your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of God will be your rear guard. At that time, when you call, the Lord will answer. When you cry out, she will say, here I am. If you get rid of the yoke among you, the finger pointing and malicious speaking, and if you offer yourself to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted one, then your light will shine in the darkness, and your night will be like noonday. God will always lead you, satisfy you in a parched land, and strengthen your bones. You will be like a watered garden and like a spring whose water never runs dry. Some of you will rebuild the ancient ruins. You will restore the foundations laid long ago. You will be called the repairer of broken walls, the restorer of streets where people live. If you keep from desecrating the Sabbath, from doing whatever you want on my day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the holy day of God honorable, if you honor it not going your own way, seeking your own pleasure, then you will delight in the Lord, and I will make you ride over the heights of the land and let you enjoy the heritage of Jacob, for the mouth of God has spoken. Rabbi Moti, the dice is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Pastor Shauna, for welcoming me. And I'm going to venture to guess that I'm probably the first rabbi who's ever spoken from this pulpit. My name is Rabbi Moti Rieber. I'm the executive director of an organization called Kansas Interfaith Action. We are a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit issue advocacy organization. And our mission statement reads, Kansas Interfaith Action is a statewide multi-faith issue advocacy organization that puts faith into action by engaging, educating, and advocating on behalf of people of faith and the public on a variety of racial, economic, and climate justice issues. So advocacy means we try to have an effect on state policy, on the state level. So although national politics gets the vast majority of the attention, most of the issues that have the most impact on our lives, on our individual lives, and our communities' lives are made on the state level in Topeka. So housing policy, transportation policy, energy policy, criminal justice, health policy, and so much more get decided almost below the radar on the state level. So a lot of people will hear the word advocacy and think it's politics, but advocacy is active citizenship. It's asking for what we want from the people who are in a position to accommodate us. Faith-based advocacy is a time-honored endeavor in this country, from the abolitionists in the antebellum period to pacifists in World War I to suffragists. The peace and environmental movements, and of course the civil rights movement, have all been led and full of and peopled by people of faith. It's a time-honored, righteous tradition. So every time I visit a new congregation, I look at I Google the denomination plus advocacy, and I see what they have. And of course, you have the Mennonite Central Committee, which is how many people have ever heard of the Mennonite Central Committee? Okay. So I'm going to read you a quote. Why we advocate. This is exactly what I wanted. In order to do our work of relief, development, and peace building, it's important that MCC also works to address the systems and policies that contribute to poverty and injustice. Advocacy is how we do that. Our advocacy work is rooted in the understanding that we are called by God to be a voice with and for the oppressed and marginalized. We take our inspiration from the biblical witness of Moses, Esther, John the Baptist, the prophets, and Jesus himself. At MCC, we base our advocacy on what we hear from workers and partners on the ground. We believe loving our neighbors means their voices shape our message to governments. So I couldn't have written that much better. KIFA, Kansas Interfaith Action, is known as KIFA from its initials, was established in 2016 as the moderate voice of faith in Kansas. So other states will have councils of churches, some denominations have statewide advocacy offices, but in Kansas before 2016, the only faith voice that was heard speaking about public policy in Kansas was from the religious right. So primarily, in those days, gay marriage and abortion were the only things that people were talking about. That left tens of thousands of people in Kansas, people like you, without a voice, without having your voice represented in Topeka as people of faith on the issues that concern us. So KIFA was established to try to fill that gap. So we're nonpartisan in our approach, which means we don't support candidates or parties, but we are clear about what we believe, and we will use the resources available to us to try to achieve it. Of course, over the course of time, KIFA has gone from a fledgling organization trying to find its place in Kansas' political ecosystem to being a relatively well-established organization with 4 full-time staff members and a very strong coalition of mainstream voices of faith. KIFA is the state public policy office of the Central State Synod of the ELCA Lutheran Church. We also have strategic partnerships with the Episcopal Diocese of Kansas, which is the eastern half of the state, with the Unitarian Universalist Fellowships, and with the Mercy and Justice team of the Great Plains Conference of the United Methodist Church, and with the Kansas-Oklahoma Conference of the United Church of Christ. And I'm going to mention that I was blessed to be present last week actually all 3 of us were, at the ELCA Central State Synod, where they passed a resolution to make it a reconciling synod, which means an open and affirming synod, which doesn't mean that every congregation has to be open and affirming, but the synod itself is open and affirming. It sends a clear message about what the church stands for, which is that we are all created in the image of God. I want to go back and say that our mission falls under what we call the 4 evils. So Dr. King he called it the 3 evils, which was racism, militarism, and poverty. We have 4 evils. I guess there's been inflation since then. So it's racism and identity-based discrimination. So Islamophobia would fall into that, anti-queer prejudice would fall into that, anti-Semitism would fall into that, as well as anti-black racism, which of course is the original sin of the American experiment. The second is poverty, economic justice. The third is gun violence, primarily violence, but mostly gun violence, which is such a plague in the country right now. And the fourth one is climate disruption, climate and clean energy, which is the one that Dr. King didn't really know about. So every issue that we work on, and I'll go into a little bit of specifics here, every issue that we work on is related to one of these areas. So the legislative session ended at the beginning of May, but our legislative priorities, which we establish at the beginning of the session every year, fell into 3 main categories. First one is what we call the faithful protection of democracy. So democracy is under significant attack right now, but the way that we address that in Kansas is through support of public education, both full funding and the right of the student to learn, so free inquiry, so against book bans and pulling books off shelves. The second one is voting rights, the right of everyone who has the right to vote to be able to vote, the ability of everyone who has the right to vote to be able to vote. And we call it personal autonomy and religious liberty, which has mostly turned into support of the rights of our LGBT siblings. Second category is economic justice issues, which is a little bit of a potpourri. Medicaid expansion is something we've been talking about. I'm sure people know about Medicaid expansion. Kind of sick of talking about Medicaid expansion, but we don't have it yet. So we worked on it again this year. We worked on payday loan reform as part of a coalition, easing access to work and family support, so that means better access to SNAP and TANF, and in the climate and clean energy area, solar. One of the things that we had this year was a bill to expand the ability of homes and businesses to put solar on their roofs, which you consider a really important part of addressing climate change is distributed generation. That's what that's called when you make your own power. There were limits, significant limits on the capacity that you could put on your roof. Now those limits have been raised. So the legislative session was a challenging one, but thanks to a lot of hard work and a good veto pen from Governor Kelly and a couple of remaining moderate Republicans to vote with her, we were able to keep the damage to a minimum. We did not get Medicaid expansion, which is the bad news, but no voucher bill passed, no significant voter suppression bill passed. The one that we've been working on is the 3-day waiting period. There's a 3-day grace period for the return of mail ballots, which they keep trying to overturn, but they haven't yet. No bill to give more exemptions from childhood immunizations, which is something that we found ourselves having to work on. And most significantly, we in our coalition were able to defeat the bill that would have banned gender-affirming care for minors. Yeah, go ahead. So this is where I kind of was going back where I was talking about the ELCA. So, I know that there's a variety of approaches. I know this is an affirming church, but I know there's a variety of approaches in our denominational partners as to how they address LGBT issues. But my position and Keith's position is that this is a human rights, it's a civil rights issue. Whatever you're teaching about the inclusion of queer folks, it doesn't have any bearing on their right to be full citizens. So, I kind of don't even care what the church teaches about it, but the state has no compelling, I do care, but the state has no compelling interest to disadvantage queer people. We accept people as they are, as they present themselves to us. It doesn't have any significance on their rights as Americans or as human beings. And that's the principle even if you don't agree with how people live, whatever, they still have the right to be who they are in the public square. And that's something that we really stand strongly on. And another high priority is the rise of white Christian nationalism, which is a fancy term for a particular kind of Christianity trying to remake the country in its image. So a particular understanding of Christianity which seeks to merge Christian and American identity, distorting both Christian faith and America's constitutional democracy. So Christian nationalism demands that Christianity be privileged by the state and implies that to be a good American, one must be Christian. It often overlaps with and provides cover for white supremacy and racial subjugation. And we reject this damaging political ideology and invite our Christian brothers and sisters to join us in opposing this threat to our faith and to our nation. So we think of these as not so much as political issues or as policy issues, but as moral issues. Systemic racism is a moral issue. Poverty and economic injustice are moral issues. Climate change is a moral issue. Recognizing them is moral awareness, and addressing them is justice. And frankly, we're at a very challenging moment. The form of Christianity that values its own power more than our democracy is on the march. It's taken over a couple of our institutions of government, and a very unpopular and deadly war is damaging the very relationships that we need to be strong enough to withstand this onslaught. So, Rabbi, I hear you saying, what can we do about these overwhelming issues here in Newton, Kansas? And I am glad you asked. You can get involved with the work of Kansas Interfaith Action and strengthen the moral voice that we bring to issues of public policy in Kansas. So I've been rewriting this last section, so I have a little bit of a change in the way that I talk about this. So at a time when many institutions in this country are failing us, so the courts are no longer as strongly supportive of rights as they were, civil rights as they were 30, 40 years ago. The press is not where it used to be, right? When there's a lot of propaganda, social media, and this Christian form of fascism is ascendant, there's one institution that has its basis in moral teachings and that is dedicated to building community. The church, communities of faith, are the one institution that are based on moral teachings and the building of community. And that is something that we need more of, because most of the social fabric, or much of the social fabric, that used to hold people together has been picked apart. But churches, however weakened they may be, still mean what they say about teaching about justice and teaching about community and teaching about care for the poor. And they're in every town. That's the other piece of it. Now, you might feel overwhelmed by politics or by, it seems like the right is ascendant and you might be represented by somebody who doesn't represent your values or whatever, but you are in an institution that stands against that wave if you use it that way, if you build it that way. So being a member of an affirming church, of an actively engaged church, is actually forwarding justice if you use it that way, if you use it the right way. Faith communities dedicated to the values of inclusivity, justice, mercy, and peace are an important counterweight. In Hebrew, it's called a tikkun. It's a repair, which means repair to the damage that religion has done to our society, both historically, as I've described it, and in the present day. Right-wing religion has not only damaged the country, it has damaged the cause of religion itself by making all God's people guilty by association. And we all know this. The reason Kifa works in and through communities of faith is because if there is hope to be had, it is in the congregations having a moral awareness and being an advocate for moral values in the difficult times we face. That's the call. If there is hope, that's where it is. That is the work we invite you into. And I also think that advocacy is good for God's people, too. I think of faith as a three-legged stool. Those of you who know about Kansas politics will know about the three-legged stool. Usually it refers to tax policy, but I have a faith three-legged stool. The first one is the relationship between the individual and God, so sort of personal faith development. The second one is mission work, so taking care of the poor. Churches are really good at this usually. They'll support hospitals or overseas spending. Nothing but nets, I remember. But the third one is advocacy. So where mission work attempts to address the ills, advocacy looks back upriver to find out why the ills are happening in the first place and attempts to go towards causes, underlying causes, and attempts to address them upstream. You can't do the other two without the third one, and churches have been averse to advocacy, but it's a core element not only of personal faith development, of our faith life, but also of making the world a better place. The particular element that Kifa brings is that of interfaith. No single church, no single denomination can bring the change that we need. Because the world we're building is not monolithic, neither must our organizations be. America is becoming the most multiracial, multicultural society in all of history. Some people may resist that. In fact, that's the cause of a lot of the right-wing backlash, but we celebrate it. We like it. We want it that way. That's the world we want to build. It is all of us working together that will build that world that we want to live in. So I want to introduce my colleagues. So Reverend Dr. Mandy Todd is our brand new Director of Engagement and Development, and Tatiana Younger is our Small Cities Organizer. And we have 2 full-time organizers, including Tatiana. We have what we're calling the Small Cities Project. Newton is one of the small cities where we're visiting, we're doing sort of more intense attention, doing public events. I don't know if anybody saw the White Christian Nationalism Forum we did at Shalom last year. We had a panel discussion on white Christian nationalism. We will be hanging around after worship today. We have a sign-up sheet. If you would like to get information about the organization or get on our mailing list, we invite you to give us your email address. We have a couple of online meetings that meet monthly, although we're in a little bit of a summer break right now. We'll have programming here in the fall. We have the Small Cities Project. There's a lot going on, and Newton is involved in that, so we invite you into that work. We know that the issues that we face are many, and that there's no guarantee that we will be able to address them in anything like a comprehensive way. We don't know that, but we must make the effort. There's a rabbinic text that I love, so you got a rabbi, so you get a rabbinic text. So there's a rabbinic text that I love. It's called Pirkei Avot, which is Ethics of the Fathers. It's about 200 CE, so after the destruction of the temple. And it says, "It is not up to you to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it." So I love that. I'm going to say it again. "It is not up to you to finish the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. For this work, addressing racial injustice, addressing poverty and economic inequality, addressing the growing unfathomable crisis of human-caused climate disruption, it's what we're here to do. It's what God wants us to do. This is the way that we make God's love and God's purpose manifest in our world. There is no one here to do this work but us. For the sake of the world, for the sake of those in need, we cannot give up, and with God's help, we cannot fail. Please join us in this sacred work. Thank you.